You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And we are joined today by one of our very favorite FBI agents, Bobby Chacon, the man himself. Bobby, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. You guys are two of my longest serving friends in the true crime field. We go way back, right, to the first Crime Con and Bill to what became Lovers Lane Murders. But I think it was Colonial Parkway Murders, of course.
Yeah.
We were first doing it, yeah.
And
so thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. We're thrilled you're here. We noticed, by the way, your little on-screen icon in the corner. It says Robert Chacon, so we're going to start calling you Robert and be more respectful,
that's
of you.
My official name, but nobody calls me that. Bobby's been my name since high school. In high school, I was Robbie, but my wife freaks out when she hears that because she thinks it does not fit me. But whenever I have like a childhood friend or something stop by or meet up and she hears somebody call me Robbie, or even some of my siblings still call me that. You get to know somebody by a certain name and the others just don't fit. So it's just, I think some people don't even know that my real name is Robert. But
let the record reflect that you are wearing an FBI t-shirt as we speak here.
Oh, yeah. So I didn't think I should put on normally I sit right in the same chair with the same background and do a lot of my news hits or Law and Crime or Court TV. And there I have to be in a shirt and tie and a jacket with a lapel pin. But for you guys, I thought I'd come in with more casual and my dog in the background. And it's more interesting.
We love it. Bobby, the last time that we had you on, it was 2021. We were still mid-pandemic, and you were putting the finishing touches on the truly fantastic Audible original series After the Fall, which I listened to multiple times. It's tremendous. What have you been doing in the meantime?
Since After the Fall, and thank you for mentioning that, After the Fall is an Audible original series that we released that in 2021 for the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and it's the story of the FBI's investigation into the attacks on 9/11, which as you listen to that, you realize the investigation actually started years prior to the attacks. We were on those guys and we knew who they were and we knew an attack was coming. We just didn't know where, when, and how, and unfortunately found out that day. But you hear from the agents in their own voices who were there investigating, not only on the ground at the Pentagon and at 9/11 and in Shanksville and in New York, but also in Pakistan and in Yemen and places like that, where we had people all over the world really on that day and after that day investigating those crimes. Since then, I'm a writer. I'm a WGA writer. I write for TV and film, and I am writing my own stuff right now because it's a tough market. And I just did not get staffed on a show last year, which would have 2022 into 2023. See, the way TV works is the staffing season usually starts late winter. So February, March, and then ends by June. If you're probably not staffed on a show by late May, you're probably not going to be staffed that season. There's less out there. There's more content, but there's less TV stuff on the bigger side, like on the network side. I wrote for Criminal Minds for a couple of years, and then I wrote for Nicole Kidman's company, Blossom Films. I wrote a show for her, or I helped write a show for her that was going to be on HBO Max for Warner Brothers and Blossom Films. Nicole was going to be the lead, and we finished writing it in March of 2020, just as the pandemic hit, and it never went into production. But we've got 10 really good scripts, a really good first season. It's called Crime Farm. It's a true story about this couple from, I believe it's the Netherlands. I probably should have that right, but it's Europe, Netherlands, somewhere over there. And the wife was a coroner / ME / profiler, and I think the husband's like a DNA expert. And this is a real couple. They're an actual true life couple. And they moved to the United States. They bought a farm in Colorado where they recreate crime scenes. And that's why we called it Crime Farm. Nicole Kidman had read an article about this couple in Vanity Fair or some big magazine and got fascinated with their story and hired my boss, who ultimately became the showrunner. She's a brilliant woman, writer, Janine Sherman-Barrois, and she ran the show. She hired me as a consultant and then as a writer on the show. And yeah, it's this fascinating couple that live in Colorado. And so Crime Farm, I'm still hoping gets made someday. And Nicole would probably not play the lead by now. They were talking about other A-listers like Nicole to play the lead, the wife, it's a husband and wife team of crime solvers. And so I write crime, so I'm good at crime. I know crime. I spent my whole life in dealing with crime. And yeah, so that's what I write. I'm not currently working on any specific TV show, but I am writing a couple of my own things, both fictional, and I'm working on 2 or 3, hopefully 3 particular cases now that are real cases. One is a woman sitting in jail in Wisconsin for murdering her abusive ex-partner, and the judge did not let any of her prior abuse in at trial, and she got convicted and serving life sentence. And so we're trying to get her a new trial, or at least a reconsideration of her sentence, because we think it's a miscarriage of justice because of the abuse that and the judge's decision not to allow some of that in was controversial. I think directly resulted in a conviction and certainly in the sentence. So that I've got a case of a young man who was going to medical school in the Caribbean and died under suspicious circumstances there. And it could be that the perpetrators of that crime are also U.S. citizens now back in the United States. So all of these are potential podcasts, potential docuseries type things. So Real Screen just took place this week. There are 2 or 3 shows that have me as a potential host or co-host that are being pitched, not related to the cases I just described, but other things. And I was contacted by a producer this week who was looking for true crime personalities, as she called it, to build a show around. And so I had a nice long talk with her yesterday, nice long Zoom, and we're going to do what they call a casting Zoom next week, where we actually shoot. So I'm hoping to get back in front of the cameras on not just the news. I do a lot of news hits, as you guys know.
Oh, yeah.
For different networks all over the place. And I would like to get back in front of the cameras on a true crime basis where, hopefully have my own show or co-host a show or be part of an ensemble crime solving group. And that's what I'm working on now. That's my focus on now. Besides writing my own stuff, the fictional stuff that I'm writing a book, I'm writing a series of stories that hopefully will be a series of books. I'm writing 2 scripts that one is a TV series, one is a film. Those are both based on my FBI experiences and stuff. And yeah, so it's just, that's what I do. But I think the main thrust right now is to get back in front of the cameras. And I'm a tough sell, though. My agent always reminds me, I'm a straight white male over 50, and soon I'll be over 60. And so that in Hollywood, that's not a real big demographic. I'm behind the curve on that one. But my partners in the FBI, he's very strong. I think probably because my mom is a very strong-willed Irish woman. And actually, 2015, I took my mom for a tour of Ireland, first time she had ever been to her ancestral homeland. Aww. And we had a great time. And so I had, one was an Irish female, and she was really a strong-willed woman. She was my partner for a number of years when we worked in drugs and gangs. And then I had a partner on the dive team, Brenda, who was she was only 4'11", but boy, she was tough as nails. And she was a great diver. And they're both now big shots now. They're retired, but they're both big shots. One runs security for the company that owns Madison Square Garden. And and the other one is like a director of security for some big pharmaceutical company in New Jersey or something. But they're both very accomplished people. And so I'm hoping that you guys both know Maureen O'Connell. Maureen and I actually worked together on the same squad in Los Angeles in the FBI. So we actually, long before we were ever in front of cameras, we were sitting in the squad area together. So I'm trying to get a show with Maureen and I together.
Yeah, I love that.
Fantastic.
So something like that, where I can maybe be part of an ensemble or part of a partnership type of thing like that. And so we're working on those kind of things. There's certainly enough content out there.
And it's always nice to see someone on TV that knows what he or she is talking about. And you certainly fit the bill there.
I try. I sometimes feel like I don't get called as much as other people because I don't go out there. I don't like speculating a lot. Look, the business is all speculation, right? When Idaho happened, for example, everyone who did it. I mean, it's all speculation, right? Until they make an arrest and really until they get a conviction. But I try to confine myself and I try not to make outrageous statements on the news, which other people do and seem to draw a lot more attention when they do that. For example, I'll give you an example. Like, I'm not a criminal profiler. No. But my mentor in this business is Jim Clemente. And literally, I talk to Jim Fitzgerald more than Jim Clemente. Jim Fitzgerald is another FBI profiler, right? And Jim and I and Maureen and Francie Hakes and Tim Clemente, Jim's brother, the 5 of us are part of a text group that literally texts multiple times a day. Text each other when we're going to be on a news show or what time. We text each other on, what did you think of that video that came out last night? And that's the five of us. It's me, Maureen O'Connell, Francie Hakes, Jim Fitzgerald, and Tim Clemente. And the five of us are this kind of dynamic group that's literally every day. So if I have a profiling question, I fall upon Jim Fitzgerald or Jim Clemente. And so I will go to the experts before I start to have my own speculation about what a profiler would think. So if I do give a profiler's viewpoint on a news show, I always try to say, I'm not a profiler, but I've talked to profilers and this is what they said, rather than I think that the killer's a man and the killer's this and that. Like, I don't want to look, profiling is a very specific job. And those guys and women train and educate themselves and go out and get the experience to do that. But far too often nowadays, every retired FBI agent, every retired detective, every internet sleuth thinks they're a profiler and thinks they know how to put a profile together, and you don't. For example, in Idaho, like I said initially, I thought it was a male, the perpetrator. That's not a profile, because I thought the physicality of killing four people at once with a knife, because they thought initially it was a knife, and they still do. That's not a profile. I saw people, oh, you say you know a profile, but you said it was a man. That's not a profile. That's just an investigator thinking, here's the crime scene, what do I think? Now, had I been told, for example, that one of the victims had a bunch of facial stabs, right? I know from my profiler friends that that would be possibly the indication of a woman killer, because a woman killing another woman oftentimes attacks the face.
Okay.
Because it's a beauty thing. It's a rage thing. It's a jealousy thing. And if I had heard that, I would have said, look, if one of the victims has an abundance of facial lacerations, I know from my profiler friends that might indicate a woman attacker. So those are the kind of things I try to bring in, but I don't like veering out. Now, the good thing about my career was I spent the majority of the first half of my career, and I'm talking about 15, 16 years, in investigations, doing really gumshoe, shoe leather investigations type stuff. And again, before computers, before cell phones. So I learned how to do investigations the old way, right?
The hard way.
The Matlock, the Columbo, all of the Kojak way.
Yeah.
And then the second half of my career, and there was an overlap. So I was an FBI agent for 27 years. So 16 years I did regular just investigations. And then 19 years with that overlap in the middle, I did forensics. So I was trained as a forensic person, as a crime scene specialist. And then I developed the underwater crime scene as a particular specialty. And I built and ran two of the four FBI dive teams, which are underwater forensic teams. And I'm hoping to have a TV show soon about that. And we had a really good meeting with FBI headquarters last week. So really hoping that we see an FBI underwater crime scene show next season. So that's another thing I'm working on. That's
I love that.
Finished. Yeah, it's an untapped market. People have not really looked at it. Unfortunately, a couple of private guys started getting a lot of attention. Adventures with Intention, Adventures with Purpose, or something. I don't know. Those two guys that were going on. And unfortunately, one of them was arrested for, I think, a child sex crime or something. So they lost some of their momentum. But I would like to see, and look, the FBI dive teams just solved a 40-year-old cold case. There was I think it was a Ford Bronco down in Alabama, Mississippi, somewhere down there. And the car was completely buried. Just the roof was kind of, the bottom of the lake was the roof of the car. So the car was below the bottom of the lake because it had been in the water for 40 years. And the FBI divers actually in Quantico created with our engineering section, like this tool that they needed to blow all the mud away and stuff. And they basically excavated this car from the bottom of the lake. And by the time they got to the interior of the car, sure enough, the skeleton was still in the driver's seat. The guy had been missing for 40 years, and so they recovered the car and the skeleton, and they're doing DNA testing on that now. In fact, the coroner on that is a friend of mine. So Joe Scott Morgan, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Joe.
Yeah.
So Joe's a friend of mine, right? Yeah, and Joe and I were just on Dr. Phil last week together, so he came out to LA.
Okay.
We had a drink at night. We stayed in the same hotel before the show the next morning, and so Joe was telling me about that because his friend is the coroner on that case in that jurisdiction.
Wow.
That's very cool.
So you guys know it's this whole true crime
It's a small
thing. It's
world.
kind of a small world, right? Yeah. So we bump into each other. So on the Dr. Phil show, which aired this week, we taped it last week, was me, Dr. Joe Scott Morgan, and Lonnie Cohn. Lonnie.
Yeah,
Lonnie's
that's a great lineup
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. And the fourth person on the panel, because we were doing the Murdoch murders, was a South Carolina anchor woman who has been covering it since day one. It's her local town and stuff. And so she was the fourth one on Dr. Phil with us. It was on Dr. Phil, and then it was on OWN, Oprah Winfrey Network.
Okay.
Of course, they spelled my name wrong. And
So you get the.
My wife's an executive producer, so she wasn't very happy. How could that happen? It never happened on one of my shows.
Which part did they misspell? Bobby or Chacon?
Chacon, the last name. But yeah, they might have spelled Bobby B-O-B-I-E, which that's if a girl's name is Bobby, they usually spell it that way. One of my partners who used to bust my chops about things, like whenever she was writing it, she would write I-E just to make me mad. And then she would dot the I with a little heart.
Yeah, of course.
So it was Bobby I-E with a little heart, and I would always have to scratch it out.
What's weird though, Bobby, is it's not like Chacon is that complicated.
No, they spelled it C-H-A-C-H-O-N. They put an extra H.
Okay.
But I always say cone, like C-O-N-E at the end. That's the way. So my name is Spanish. My grandfather was born in Spain, but it's pronounced the same way as Madonna, the singer, pronounces her name, Chacon. But she is Italian descent, so her Chacon is spelled C-I-C-O-N-E. And two of my grandmothers were born in Italy, but my grandfather, who I get my last name from, was born in Spain, so it's C-H-A-C-O-N. Now, the other problem is, like, there was a very famous boxer named Bobby Chacon.
Right.
And so if you go on YouTube and search my name, I always have to tell people you have to put FBI with it, because the first 6 pages of YouTube videos are going to be the boxer, the famous boxer. And I constantly get asked,
and that's not
you related
you.
To the boxer?
Right.
You related to the boxer? Yeah, so I always have to kind of preface that with saying, if you're going to search for me, search with the FBI.
You'd mentioned you were doing all these news hits, and felt like every time I turned around on Facebook for at least the last couple of weeks, it's been one of our true crime friends, like, on a new show. And they were like, hey, I'm going on this show. So I was trying to track you and Maureen and Fitz and like just everybody all at once. And I'm going like, okay, I got to turn here so I can see Bobby, and I got to turn here so I can see Maureen. What are some of the things that you have been talking about with regard to the Idaho case, for example? Like, when you show up to do a news hit, what are they asking you about in particular?
It generally moves like through phases, right? So initially it's who done it? Who is the person who did this before they get the arrested? And then people, there's only so much you can do before the person's arrested, right? So you talk about who might have done this. But then before the person's arrested, they turn to talk to, okay, now they've released a search warrant. So what did they find? And what is what they found mean? Particularly what it means to who might have done this, because the person basically is still out there in the world. And then once what really bothers me, and what bothered me about Idaho and still bothers me about Idaho, is once they catch the guy or girl, but in this case guy, I'm most of the time guy. Once they catch the person, then the conversation always turns to why. And that really drives me crazy, because first of all, I investigate a lot of homicides with respect to mafia hits and gang cartel hits and things like that. The RICO statute has a murder part of it. And so we used to do a lot of RICO murders. And so I was doing so much in New York City, they sent me to the NYPD homicide school, which was a 6-week school. It was great. The why of it is never really required for a statute, right? For murder, you don't have to show why. I always tell people, look, I have to show you who did it and how they did it, really, to the jury. Now, prosecutors do like to tell a story and a narrative, and they like the why, because if you don't have the why, it opens up for the defense a way to maybe get a reasonable doubt if you don't have why, because people want to know the why of it. But remember, most murder statutes don't require intent. They don't require you to show why somebody did it. Imagine you have an intersection in a city and you have a camera watching a traffic cam, and you show somebody get out of a car and another person get out of a car, and one person shoots the other one dead. And you can see them both clearly, but I don't have to know why. I don't have to know it's road rage. I don't have to know one was sleeping with the other's boyfriend. I don't have to know any of that. All I can show you is that guy killed that guy. And here's the video proving it. Conviction. That's it. That's all you need to show. You need to show why. Now, there are some statutes like hate crimes where if you kill somebody because they're a member of a protected class, sexual orientation, race, whatever, then the intent has to be there. Then you have to show that they killed that person. Now, most of those statutes are enhancement statutes. So you get convicted of murder, and then because you did it because the person looked the way they looked or then you get an enhancement to the sentencing. A lot of hate crime legislation is enhancements. You prove the murder, conviction, and then you prove why, and then you get an enhancement. So I break it up into two reasons why the why frustrates me a little bit, or 3 reasons really. Number one, that you don't need to prove it. Okay, but I get that prosecutors like to tell the jury why. Number 2, the why, it's going to be, This is an irrational, most of these are irrational acts by irrational people. And we're simply not going to understand the why. And if and when we hear the why, it's not going to provide us with any level of comfort. And it's certainly not going to be a comfort to the families. There's no justifiable reason why someone would murder 4 young college kids. There's no justifiable reason why. So when we hear the why, we're either going to be frustrated or we're going to be dumbfounded, or it's just not going to provide us with any kind of emotional resolution. And it's certainly not going to provide the families with any kind of consoling. It just doesn't. It's not going to, it almost can be worse when you realize you murdered my daughter or son for that reason. Really? That's the reason? It's not going to provide any comfort. And the third really reason is it's all conjecture. Even if the prosecution has evidence that they think can tend to show the jury the why, the really only way you're going to get 100% of the why is if the person who did it tells you. It's in the mind of the killer. And unless they testify or unless they confess and tell you the why, the prosecution, even if they say, here's why he did it, and here's evidence of that, of what we believe is the why he did it, it's really going not to be proof. It's not going to be proof. It's going to be a theory. We have a theory of this is why he killed these people. Here's the evidence that supports our theory. But it's still a theory. And you don't need that theory to get a conviction, by the way, like I said earlier. And again, it's going to be of little consolation to the family, and it's going to make little sense to the rest of us. And that's why the why, I just think that talking about the why of it is just, to me, it's get frustrating. And that's why since he's been arrested and since like his first, that's all anyone wants to talk to anymore about the why of it. And I really don't care about the why of it. Not that I don't care about the why of it. I don't mean to sound callous. It's like, I don't want to give this guy any more attention than he deserves. And I don't want to go into his life. I don't want to know about his childhood. I don't want to know. A lot of people have bad childhoods. I've known people who've gotten hooked on drugs in high school and heroin. I've known people and I know some of those same people who've made a good life out of themselves, and they didn't go out and murder people. And most of the people who've had bad childhoods did not turn into, you know what I mean? So it's just a little frustrating. And I get it, because we're not going to have another hearing until June in the Kohberger case. And there's a gag order, so no one's really going to be talking about this stuff. So people have to conjure up something to talk about. So the why is always, it provides an endless stream of speculation, because it's not definitive, it's not forensics, it's not something you can actually look at, see, and talk about. It's perfect for this type of true crime scenario, because it's just conjecture. Somebody has one thought, somebody has another. In the end, to me, it won't really matter. It won't really matter why. It won't give those families any comfort, and it's not really required for the conviction. So to me, I've actually turned down some appearances if that's all they wanted to talk about, the why of it. Because you want to talk to a profile, fine. You want to talk to people like Jim Clemente, people like Chris Mahandy, people like who specialize in that stuff. But in the end, at the end of the day, it's all going to be someone's speculation.
Are you comfortable, for instance, as a former FBI agent, talking about how investigations work, how cases are put together? Is that more in your sweet spot?
Yeah, I think so. I think, and then that's what I really enjoyed doing, even in the Idaho case in the early days, right? What are the investigators doing now? And I actually was doing a lot of those hits right after, maybe 4 weeks in, 5 weeks in, 6 weeks in, when we started getting a lot of, the police aren't doing anything, it's taking so long. And I'm like, I'm pulling what little hair I have left out of my head. Like, what do you mean it's taking so long? We're only 4 to 5, 6 weeks into a quadruple homicide investigation with a very complex crime scene with a lot of forensics to go through. The people in the lab are probably working through it. The people who are doing, the ballistics, not ballistics, but the wound patterns in the ME's office. They're looking at the wound patterns. The lab is trying to get different DNA profiles out of mixed blood. All of this takes time. And people were like, I was shocked and then there was some private investigators I was on court TV with them. Yeah, the police are doing this. Oh, this is clearly over the head of the Moscow PD. Now look, obviously Moscow PD is a small town, but they did everything right. They invited the Idaho State Police in. They invited the FBI in. because this is a very manpower intensive type case. You need bodies. And one of the things the FBI was always good at is throwing bodies at it. You saw that in missing children's cases where hundreds of agents are out in the field or walking through the woods arm in arm trying to find a child or something like that. So we were always very good at throwing manpower because, an FBI office a field office can just drop everything and say, look, tomorrow you're going to spend 12 hours doing this. And so we're really good at throwing things down range, throwing bodies down range. And we can bring in people from other field offices and things like that. And Moscow did everything right in this case. And really, it was, to me, a lightning fast arrest. You guys know, and I likened it. Look, we had the Delphi, Indiana murders of Abby and Libby, and they took a photograph. We didn't have that in Idaho. They took a photograph of the killer, and it still took 5 years. And the killer was living among them, was living in that small community. And that took 5 years. So you have to be patient in investigations like this. I applaud everybody in Idaho that took part because it was a lightning fast resolution. They got that murderer really fast. But if you look at something like the Delphi murders where you had a photograph of the killer and the killer was, we know now, was living in that small community, and it still took them 5 years. But you know what? They got the guy. And that's what the important part is.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
When the FBI comes in on a case like this and they form like a joint, task force maybe with local law enforcement, how does the casework get broken up? Who takes the lead? Is it local or does the FBI take the lead? Like, how does that work? Break that down for us.
The real lead is the prosecutor's office because everything has to be done the right way for the prosecutor to obtain a conviction. Now, most of us have seen a Law and Order episode where the first 20 minutes is the investigation, the middle 20 minutes are like the cops and the prosecutors working together, the last 20 minutes are in the courtroom. So if you think about that kind of paradigm, so the investigators are out there doing their job initially, but in a case like this, very early on, the prosecutor's office gets involved. And so you start working through the prosecutor's office and saying, what do we need? What are we looking at? This is what we got. So that 20 minutes, that first 20 minutes of a Law and Order episode is a little bit truncated in this kind of case because the prosecutors get involved right away. And you don't want to make any mistakes that could end up suppressing evidence or something like that in court later on. So the prosecutor's office, everybody tries to work through the prosecutor's office. Because it happened in a particular jurisdiction, you know who's going to be prosecuted for murder, you know who the prosecutor's office is going to be. So you work with them and say, what do you need from us? And that's basically what the FBI does. What do you need from us? Here's what we can offer you. We can offer you the FBI laboratory in Quantico. We can offer you forensics. We can offer you whatever. And we can offer you manpower. We can offer you an 800 number that our people can answer. And we can triage leads that come in. All of that kind of stuff. And obviously, we knew thousands of calls were being made. And every time a new piece of evidence was released or a new thing happened in the case, there were more people online sending in tips on the tip line, both email, text, and phone calls and stuff. And so every one of those leads, no matter how obscure and no matter how down on the triage list it is, has to get run out. So somebody has to go out. That's where the FBI comes in, sending people out to knock on doors or to get records or to look for, and everybody works together. But the FBI, I think, was running the tip line because of the sheer volume of it. And so everybody brings a little bit of a different expertise to it. But by and large, resources and manpower are what the FBI can bring. And in this case, I think what they brought was the tip line. We can handle the tips. And of course, you triage them. So the ones that look really good, you might send right back to Moscow and right back to the investigative task force that has Idaho State Police, Moscow, and a couple of FBI agents are probably like that. There's probably a small team doing that. There's probably what we call a war room over at the prosecutor's office where detectives and agents are going every day and looking through the boxes of evidence and things like that. And so there's teams that are still running leads. There's teams that are still going over the forensics, the lab reports that are coming in. And then there's a team at the prosecutor's office saying, okay, what's our next hearing? And what do we have to produce at the hearing? Witnesses, documents, whatever. Let's make sure the witnesses are interviewed. Let's make sure their statements are tight. Let's make sure their testimony is going to be prepared. Lab reports, let's make sure those lab reports are done. Talk to the lab examiner who filled out the report. Make sure that everything in that report is accurate and they're going to testify to their report. So all of those things are happening. Now that we have somebody in custody and we have a schedule, at least, of what we think may be hearings. After his preliminary hearing, by the way, in June, then you will start seeing a series of hearings. The defense will probably try to challenge some of the evidence before the trial. They can actually try to keep it out of the trial, out before the jury. So you will see a number of hearings that go on like that. And so they are already preparing for those hearings. Discovery. So you're turning stuff over to the defense. You have to make sure before you turn it over that it's proper and that it's going to the right people, because the defense does have the opportunity to see everything that the prosecution has. Unlike movies and TV where you have these big gotcha moments in the courtroom, it's very rare that actually happens. I can tell you as a lawyer also, it's very rare that you get a gotcha moment, because the defense always has access to all the stuff the prosecution is going to put forth before the jury. And it does happen, it's very rare. They have an opportunity to get their own laboratory analysts to examine evidence and their own experts to look at certain things and to challenge the government experts and stuff. So all of that is happening, and the FBI can lend some assistance to that.
One of the things we discussed on Mind Over Murder was bizarre armchair detective theorizing where people were going on and on when the affidavit came out. We said repeatedly is not everything that the investigators have. It's a snapshot. But boy, people would just go absolutely berserk saying that it's clear the investigators don't have enough to convict this man. And we found it very frustrating that everybody assumed that the affidavit was everything that the investigators
had.
They
tried to put that forward. Look, the affidavit only has to get probable cause. But that being said, I've never worked with a prosecutor that was comfortable going forward with an arrest if on the day of the arrest they didn't have enough to convict. Because an arrest starts a ticking clock, in effect. We have a speedy trial rule, both on federal and state. You have what's called a speedy trial, and that's constitutional. The government has to take you to trial in a speedy manner. The government's not allowed to hold you forever on charges and just take its time. So you have a speedy trial thing. Now, most of the time, the defense slows things down as well because they need time to digest the evidence and stuff. But theoretically, once the day you charge somebody, the day you make that arrest, that clock starts ticking for the prosecution. Normally, to me, prosecutors really have to have a high degree of comfort on the day somebody's charged and arrested. Even though you haven't revealed all that evidence, they have to have, and even though when you hope and you figure that there's going to be more evidence coming in, the day you charge, you almost have to be in the mindset as a prosecutor, I'm not going to get one more piece of evidence after the day I charge this person. You have to play that game mentally because you might not, and you've already charged them. And with double jeopardy, now that they're facing legal jeopardy, they cannot be charged again. So you only have one bite at the apple in that respect. Because you charge them and because the ticking clock starts in most jurisdictions, there are criminal procedure laws, there are rules that are a little different. I'm generalizing a lot of this, but you have to go in that mental mindset of I have enough to convict this person on the day he's arrested, because I can't count on getting things after that because the clock is ticking. And I think I'm going to get it, and a lot of that time does happen. But once I hear charges in this type of case, which is a huge case, and the prosecutors don't want to get egg on their face, they don't want to be embarrassed, so they take their time. And if, like in this case, we know now, they had him under surveillance. If they wanted to wait another week, they could have, because they had him under surveillance. He wasn't going to hurt anybody else. The FBI had him on 24/7 surveillance, knew where he was. They were watching him. So if the prosecutors weren't comfortable with going ahead on that particular day, they could have waited another day. They could have waited a week. They could have done whatever they wanted, because now they had who they thought was their guy, and they had him under 24/7 surveillance.
Let's ask a question that has been kicked around a lot. I just would love your input.
Yeah.
The two traffic stops as the father and the son drove back from Pullman, Washington, all the way back to Pennsylvania, 2,500 miles. They get pulled over twice within approximately 10 or so minutes. Deliberate, not deliberate, and why twice?
Number one, I'll say, I don't know. But number two, I will say I have used this technique, and I used it a lot in New York City when I was working the mob. Okay. I would often, my partner, I worked on an organized crime task force. My partner was an NYPD detective. He had what we call a citywide radio. So he could raise any NYPD unit on his radio and get a car stop for us. And we often did that. Now you use it. It's a technique that's, first of all, it's legal and it's very proper. Second of all, you use it judiciously. We used it judiciously because I was working against the Lucchese crime family, and those guys were wise to it. They were always looking for surveillance, and if a cop pulled them over in a weird place, they would go, oh. So we always used it very judiciously. We didn't overuse it because we didn't want to raise them up on our presence, watching them. So when I first heard 2 in 10 minutes, I said 1 maybe, but I don't think both of them are. I think one of them is probably a pretext, what we call a pretext stop, but the other probably isn't. Now, the funny thing to me, or the odd thing to me, was I had them reversed. So the first one was a sheriff's deputy who pulled him over, and the second one was a state trooper. Now, here's why that raised me up. Because on an interstate, almost always, it's the state trooper's kind of jurisdiction to run traffic violations on an interstate.
Right.
You do, I live close to I-10 here out of east of Los Angeles, and the California Highway Patrol is always on that. And we always see, now I do see a Riverside County Sheriff's Deputy car from time to time, or even a Palm Springs Police Department car on there. They're usually going from point A to point B. They happen to be on the interstate doing that. They're not out there doing patrol and looking for traffic violations on the interstate. That's highway patrol or state troopers, generally. Now, they can, obviously, if you go zooming by a sheriff's deputy or zooming by a police department car, they're going to pull you over because, you're doing it right in front of them, or you're a risk, or you're a danger to other people. So they're fully capable of pulling you over and giving you a ticket on the interstate. It's just not what they normally do. It's very rare that they would do that. Usually that's the purview of the state police. So when I heard it was a sheriff's deputy on an interstate pulling somebody over for following too close behind another car, truck, or whatever, or even if it was speeding, if it's just a routine violation of the traffic laws, generally a sheriff's deputy wouldn't do that on an interstate. So I thought maybe the FBI, or maybe it was a directed stop. The second one happened to be a trooper. So I think if one of them was a pretext stop, my bet would be on the first one, because it's unusual to have a sheriff's deputy pull. It's not unusual to have a trooper. That's the first reason. The second reason is you wouldn't direct the second stop because it's too close to the first stop in time, and you're going to get him suspicious, and you don't want that. And it's normal for a trooper to pull somebody over on the interstate. It's not normal to me for the sheriff. So if one of them was, so I was thinking, when I first heard it, I was thinking, oh, the first one was directed. But then the FBI came out with a statement and said, we didn't have anything to do with either of those stops. They came out with a statement. And I don't think the FBI would lie about that at this point, because they don't want to risk anything in this case. Because it doesn't buy them anything. It doesn't help the FBI by denying it. They didn't have to make any statement to them, because it is a proper technique. So they didn't have to make any statement. But if they made the statement like that, and then it comes out that they lied about that, then it just gives the defense in the case some fodder. The defense doesn't need a lot. They just need to create one doubt in one juror. I don't see why the FBI would deny it if it wasn't true that they didn't have anything. Now, that being said, we've already talked about this was a task force with at least 3 agencies, at least Moscow PD, Idaho State Police, FBI. It could have been one of the other 2 that directed that stop. It could have been Idaho State Police. The FBI can come and disclaim everything because it was an Idaho State Police that called up that sheriff's department and asked for that stop. I don't know. All I know is I personally, look, I'm not a big fan of FBI headquarters, but when the FBI put out that statement, I think it's legitimate, because there is no upside for the FBI to make that statement, and there's a downside if they're caught lying. Then the defense is going to say, see, the FBI is lying in this case, because they could have just not said any statement, not made any statement, and people can keep guessing. But when they came out with a statement saying we didn't have anything to do with either of those stops, I think that happened in this particular case. I think that's true.
Couldn't it be true that the Idaho State Police, in other words, no one ever said definitively which agency or agencies, plural, followed him? We're talking about 2,500 miles. This is a long way to go. I don't know who followed him, but I got the impression from everything I read and heard that somebody actually followed the father and son across the country.
Yeah, I don't know if that happened either, but I certainly think, look, that's something the FBI does all the time, by the way. And because the FBI is nationwide, it's very easy for us to hand off a subject. So we have specific people and specific trained teams that do physical surveillance. That's all they do. And they work together, obviously, especially if they have overlapping jurisdictions. So like the New York agents and the New Jersey agents always work together, even though some were assigned to New York City office, some were assigned to Newark office. But if they were following a mobster out of New York into New Jersey, they have their radios and they would often communicate with each other. And then if he went through and went to Pennsylvania, the Jersey agents could get on the radio and talk to the Pennsylvania agents. So that's a very easily believable scenario that the FBI was just following, handing him off. So because they knew where he was going at that point, because they knew who he was, they knew where his father lived. And so they knew where he was going. And so I'm sure that before he even arrived, the FBI could have installed what we call pole cameras, which is you can put a camera in a tree, you can put a camera on a telephone pole, because his father and him were out. They knew where they were. They had a couple of days advance notice. They could have put a camera up anywhere in that neighborhood to watch his house because they knew where his house was. They knew he wasn't home. So if a AT&T van was out on his street for too long that week, I would say that was probably a pole camera being put up on an electrical box that you would never see, and yet that we could have 24/7 coverage of his house.
I know we can't really foresee exactly what's going to happen in this case, but do you think it would make more sense for him to plead out to avoid the death penalty, or do you see him taking it all the way to trial? He's already said, I look forward to exonerating myself on all these charges. All right, you arrogant asshole, go ahead. I'm curious, would it make more sense for him to plead out, or do you think he's going to go ahead and run the whole trial thing?
It's all going to depend, right, on the evidence that they have. And I think Bill's right. I think they have a lot more evidence than they've shown so far. And that's one of the things his defense team will assess. That's what his lawyer's job is, really, to look at the evidence against us and to decide what the best deal for our client is. Yeah, obviously, look, the bottom line, the defendant always has a decision. No matter what his lawyers recommend he do, smart people usually would listen to their lawyers. He has the right to do anything he wants. We've seen cases where lawyers have quit because the client won't listen to their advice and they get a new lawyer if they know it's a loser. So I think like his lawyers are going to assess the evidence, and if they have a chance, have they announced whether they're going to seek the death penalty in this case?
They have not.
Okay. Yeah. And it's going to take a little time. And again, that's going to depend on the strength they feel of the evidence. I know one victim's family wants the death penalty, and at least one of the others says they don't believe in the death penalty. So you have not that impacts too much the law, because you either have it or you don't enough to go forward. But I will say that death penalty cases have built in additional hearings and additional appeals and additional scrutiny, obviously, and as they should, right? And so it takes a lot longer, not necessarily to go to trial and get a conviction, but it takes a lot longer after trial. And you have to be, because there's all built-in automatic appeals. And so you have to be extra careful at trial and before the trial in how you dot your I's and cross your T's, because you know there's going to be an enormously additional amount of scrutiny of the case and the trial and what happened at the trial and get the conviction, post-conviction if you get it, and then post-sentencing. Somebody's sentenced to a death penalty, it's good. It triggers automatic reviews by a bunch of different people. In that sense, it does slow down the process a little bit in the beginning and throughout, because you want to be extra careful, because you know that additional review is going to be there. And so the trial takes longer, pre-trial hearings take longer. Obviously, post-conviction appeals take much longer. And like I said, as they should, because it's a penalty that can't be reversed, obviously.
Are you troubled by the lack of a murder weapon to date? Do you feel like that's problematic for the prosecution? No. I think that I worked a lot of cases where, especially on the dive team, where we were looking for the murder weapon and prosecutors were uncomfortable going forward until we found the weapon and it was in the water and stuff like that. But you don't need a weapon for a conviction, obviously. And I think in this case, the way it'll come in to the jury is you'll get a medical examiner who will come in and, in unfortunately gruesome detail, describe the wound patterns and describe the wounds, the depth of the wounds, the type of wounds, how the skin was lacerated with the knife, with the weapon. And I think you will get, if you have the murder weapon, you don't have to have as much of that type of evidence or testimony at trial. But I think if you don't have the weapon, then you just supplement that with the testimony of a wound expert
You have the person who did the actual autopsy, and then you have somebody else come in, like Dr. Lee, you often see Dr. Lee do, come in on top of that and add to it. And so you might have a wound expert to come in and review the evidence that was done by the local coroner and say, yeah, this is what these wounds mean. This is how it means. The weapon must have been this big. It must have had this kind of blade and all of that. So I think you will get, the wounds are there, right? They were created by something and it caused the death. So I don't think you need the murder weapon. It's always nice to have. It's one of the things prosecutors always love to have, particularly if you have the killer's DNA on it or whatever. But I don't think it's needed. I don't think they have it in this case yet. I don't know that they will. Again, as part of the FBI dive team, I did a case years ago where there was a long drive involved and a guy that killed his ex-wife and drove back home. And we dove every pond, lake, and river and it was hundreds of miles, and we never found it. But the prosecutors wanted us to be thorough and do that and stuff. And it was only because that's the route they had theorized that he drove. So yeah, look, if they don't have the weapon and if Kohberger is the killer, he had ample opportunity to put it anywhere. It could be in water, it could be in dirt, it could be incinerated, it could be in a lot of different places. And I think if they find it now, it's just fortuitous. It's super bad luck on his part or stupidity on his part. We already know that he's not the master criminal that people originally thought he was when he was first arrested. Oh my God, he's going for his PhD in criminology. It has nothing to do with it. He's a psychopath. He's a murderous, evil person. It has nothing to do with his educational background.
You actually just anticipated the last question that I was going to ask about that. So thank you for doing that. Yeah. And that actually was going to be, do you think he is some variety of criminal mastermind? Like, it has been put forward, this idea that does it help you become a better criminal if you study criminology? Our friend Mac very memorably and colorfully said that you can read the Kama Sutra, but that don't make you Casanova. And that is her answer to that.
Yeah, my answer is if he went to school to become a master criminal, he should get his tuition money back because he did everything wrong in this case. I made that statement on a national news network and got some pretty funny responses on Twitter. But yeah, if he paid to go to school to be a master criminal, he needs to get his tuition money back because he made every mistake in the book. He left the sheath. I mean, it's just one notch below leaving the murder weapon with your DNA on in the bed of one of the victims. The sheath with his DNA on the thumb latch. What more can you do? Driving your own car to the scene and away, carrying your phone and turning it off just before and turning it back on just after the murders, going back to the murder scene several hours later. Having now what we're finding out is maybe stalking behavior on some of the victims. Look, I don't know that he could have made many more mistakes. He did everything but. So yeah, I think if he went to school to be a master, but that's not what we go to. That's not what criminology is about. It's about actually, it's a reverse engineering question, right? So it's actually about convicting people and proving people guilty. And then the theory is you can reverse engineer that. Because, look, I was an FBI agent for 27 years. I've been investigative for 30 years. I'm not sure I could pull off the perfect crime. Everybody always asks that. I would be probably as guilty as anybody. I'm really good at catching people that did it, but I'm not saying I know how to do it. Particularly with even from when I was investigating murders in the 80s and 90s, you have so many more tools. The MVAC is just one example of all of these tools now that law enforcement has and what they can do with your cell phone and what they can do with DNA. It's just amazing. And I wouldn't be confident myself. I'm very confident myself that I can catch a bad guy. I'm not very confident that I could be a successful bad guy. And I don't think it's a mirror opposite of each other. I don't think the skills are mirror opposites of each other.
I hope this podcast is never used in a murder investigation.
Yeah, I don't think so. I've studied successful murders. Israel Keyes was the last serial killer that I specifically worked on when I was in the FBI. And so I know how he was successful at it, but I don't think even he was 34 years old when he was caught, and he's dead now, thankfully, but at his own hands. But yeah, I don't think being a master investigator makes you potentially a master criminal.
Perfect. Bobby, as always, it's a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me anytime.
That's going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. We'll see you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.